about 12 o'clock, so good afternoon, everyone. My presentation will probably take about 30 minutes, and as you can see, I'm going to cover some of the Texas state laws that I prosecute. When Sergeant Walsh was talking to you, and also when Officer Dicker was showing you a lot of the slides, our office prosecuted most of those cases, and of course we're able to do that because we have laws in place that allow us to do that. So the laws that we use, I mean, obviously, where do those come from? Legislature, right? And the legislature gives us some guidance in the form of legislative history. In other words, the legislature tells us through comments and some of the written history of a bill that becomes a statute what they were trying to achieve and accomplish. So we have that as guidance. Sometimes the laws that are enacted do what they're intended to do, and sometimes they don't quite get there. And when that happens, we have to go back to the legislature and make some changes, and that happens frequently. When there are unforeseen circumstances that come up that need to be addressed. But as far as interpreting those laws, who initially interprets those statutes? If it's a criminal statute, who would be the initial entity, I guess, interpreting what that statute means? Any ideas?
That would be the investigator on site, correct?
Well, not so much the investigator. Generally, it would be the DA's office if they're the ones charged with prosecuting that particular statute. Now, the investigators, when they're out on site, they will always contact the DA's office. Generally, of course, if it's an environmental case, they would contact me or someone in my division for guidance on that investigation and guidance as far as whether or not we will accept charges or decline charges, if we need to get a search warrant, grand jury subpoenas, things of that nature. Anything that's going to be needed to further their investigation, they will contact our office. And you may not know this, but for every criminal charge that's filed in Harris County, whether it's environmental or some other type of charge, regardless of what it is, every single charge comes through the Harris County DA's office. We have a 24-hour intake division that does nothing but accept charges from police officers that are out on the scene, out in the field, conducting an investigation, and it's open 24/7 every day of the year. So every charge comes through a prosecutor that hears some of the facts of the case and then determines whether or not to accept the charge. And the environmental cases are the same way. Every one of their investigations that results in criminal prosecution has to first be accepted by our office. And then once we get the file, we go from there to determine what charges are going to be appropriate, what people or entities should be charged, and then the level of those charges too. So we have quite a bit of discretion along those grounds. As far as interpreting the statutes, since we initially interpret the statute, usually we're correct, sometimes we're not. And that's what the court system is for. We might have one position on a statute, the defense might have another position, and then it's up to the trial court judge to determine who's right. If we don't like the outcome there, we can appeal those decisions, and ultimately it's the Court of Appeals and the Court of Criminal Appeals that makes the final determination as to what a statute means and how it's going to be interpreted. And once that final outcome is reached, if that wasn't the legislative intent, when the legislature meets again, they'll change it. And we've gone to them on occasion to say, look, here's how the Court of Criminal Appeals is interpreting this statute. We don't think this is what you meant. Is this what you meant for the outcome to be? If it was, they'll tell us. If it wasn't, they'll draft a new statute that will hopefully more accurately reflect what their intent was. So what I'm going to be talking to you about for the next 30 minutes is the water pollution statutes, because this is the one that we use the most often. You can find these statutes in Chapter 7 of the Texas Water Code, and that chapter is titled Enforcement. If you you go to subchapter E, that's where you're going to find the criminal offenses and penalties. Now, chapter 7 also contains administrative enforcement. It contains civil enforcement, and there are also definitions and other provisions in there. But criminal provisions are also there, but you go down to subchapter E to find those. The definitions, however, are in the Texas Clean Water Act, and that's in chapter 26 of the Water Code. So, if we're talking about discharges into water in the state, first of all, we have to know what do we mean by water in the state. Very important definition. You can see if you read this one. Now, I've kind of redacted it somewhat just for the parts that we use most often. But you can see that it covers essentially everything. Groundwater, surface water, lakes, bays, and ponds, pretty self-explanatory. All of the bodies of surface water. It doesn't matter whether they're natural or artificial. So if you have a pond on your property, a man-made pond that either you or a previous owner made, that's water in the state of Texas because it now has water in it. Doesn't matter how it was created. Doesn't matter whether it's fresh or salt, navigable or non-navigable. Now that's a big difference between state law and federal law, because under the Federal Clean Water Act, a body of water must be a navigable waterway, or it must be a tributary attached to a navigable waterway. In the state of Texas, that doesn't matter. And then this last part, it includes the beds and banks of all water courses and bodies of surface water. Well, when are you going to see the bed and banks of a water course? I'm sorry?
When the water's low?
When it's low or when it's completely dry. So you can have water in the state even if there's no water in that water course at the time. For example, if you have a dry drainage ditch, that drainage ditch is water in the state. Why? Because it's a water course, and when it rains, it will have water in it. Even if at the time it's dry as a bone, that is still water in the state if a waste or contaminant is introduced into it. The same way with a storm sewer or any kind of drain. You know, with the drought that we had, a lot of water courses were completely dry. But if you introduce a waste or contaminant into those water courses, that's still water pollution because it is a water course. So anything inside the jurisdiction of the state, we do have some Court of Appeals interpretation of what these mean. In Watts v. State, we had filed a case against Mr. Watts for water pollution because he had discharged septic waste into a drainage ditch out in front of his small mobile home park that had septic systems that no longer work. So he just dug trenches from each mobile home out to the park so that when the residents flushed their toilets, it just went out to the drainage ditch out in front of the park. They argued that that drainage ditch was not water in the state. The 14th Court of Appeals disagreed and said, yes, it is water in the state. They wrote up quite a few opinions in Watts before they finally agreed with our position, because at the time there was no water in this ditch at all when we were doing our investigation. And the Court of Appeals held, hey, that doesn't matter. That drainage ditch is a water course. It will always be a water course. It never loses its characteristic as a water course just because it happens to be dry at any particular time. Sanitary sewer lines. In McGee, we prosecuted him. He was a vacuum truck operator, picked up septic waste and decided, you know, this is sewage. Why can't I just discharge it into the sanitary sewer? So he popped a manhole and proceeded to discharge without any type of authorization. He was arrested and charged. He tried to argue that that sanitary sewer line, because it was going to a publicly owned treatment works operated by the city of Houston to be treated, that was not water in the state. We basically argued in the Court of Appeals, well, if it's not water in the state, whose water is it? Who owns that water? You know, the city of Houston doesn't own that water. It treats it, but all the citizens own that water because it's going to be discharged upon treatment. And the Court of Appeals agreed and held that that water in that sanitary sewer most of you in this room, if you generate waste, it's probably going to be industrial waste. It can be municipal waste or any of these others, and you can see what we mean by industrial waste. Anything resulting from any process of industry, manufacturing, trade, or business. So it's going to cover pretty much everything that's a commercial byproduct of your business is going to be considered industrial waste. We also have other waste that includes things that aren't encompassed by sewage or industrial waste or any of those other things. And you can see oil is included in here, chemicals, just about any other substance that's a waste material. Pollutant is important because the statute that you're going to see prohibits the unauthorized discharge of any waste or pollutant. Pollutant, you can see what we mean here. It can be solid waste, it can be chemical waste, biological materials, it can just be heat. Because we have had businesses that generate a lot of heated water that they use in cooling processes, and then they discharge that heated water, and it's resulted in fish kills because of the temperature of what's being discharged. And that can also be considered pollutant. Basically, again, anything that's discharged into any water in the state. All right. Now, and I tell my officers this is a really important definition, because before I can charge an individual or an entity with water pollution, the violation that we have must meet this definition for pollution. And if you remember back when you were in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and you used to be called up by the teacher to diagram sentences, you can see when you look at this, this is one very long run-on sentence that needs to be diagrammed to see what we mean by pollution. Well, it can mean the alteration of the physical, thermal, chemical, or biological quality of water. What do we mean by alteration of the physical? Who can tell me what that means? What are the physical states of water? Right? Solid, liquid, and gas, right? It can be ice, it can be vapors, or it can be the liquid that we know of. If what you do changes the physical state of the water, that's pollution. Thermal, we've talked about, chemical and biological quality is pretty self-explanatory. Or if it contaminates any water in the state that renders the water harmful, detrimental, or injurious to humans, animal life, vegetation, or property, that is pollution. Or lastly, if it just impairs the usefulness or the public enjoyment of the water for any lawful or reasonable purpose, that's also pollution. Say, for example, we have a recreational lake, Lake Houston, for example, Lake Conroe, places where people fish or water ski or do other things on top of the water, swimming, etc. If what